Hey guys, what's up? Producer engineer Alex Scott here with Consordini.com. Thanks so much for checking out another one of our video tutorials. Today I'm going to be looking at a very important process in mixing, and that is mixing vocals. Specifically, we're going to be looking at a female pop vocal, okay? Now, there's a million different ways to go about mixing a great pop vocal, but I'm just going to go through some really basic, good kind of techniques and steps that you guys are going to want to take a look at anytime you're looking at a vocal in this style. So the track we're looking at today is from a Colorado artist that I have worked with for years and years and years. Her name is Veronique Van Pelt, and the project is called None Such Palace. The tune in particular is called Like We Did, okay? And it's an awesome kind of, real classic, modern pop, female-driven pop vocal track. The whole record is like this. I worked one-on-one with Veronique to produce the whole record, so I'm doing all the instrumentation and mixing and mastering and all that kind of stuff. It's really turned out awesome. I'm incredibly pleased and proud of what we were able to do on this record, and I'm really excited to be able to share it with you guys. And thank you so much to Veronique for lending us her voice and letting us take a look at how we are mixing this track. So, again, there's a million different ways you can go about doing a pop vocal. Some guys like a lot of delay, some guys like a lot of reverb, some guys like to do all kinds of different layering techniques and whisper tracks and all that kind of stuff. We're not really going to be looking into much of that today. What we're mainly going to be focusing on is just getting it to a really good, even starting point. Now, Veronique is a truly gifted singer. I mean, she is one of the greatest singers I've ever worked with. Her voice has a really interesting timbre and texture to it that I really love. And so really the goal here is to not muddy it up with all kinds of like chorusing or filtering or anything crazy. We just want to get it to sound as big and as natural as possible with a little bit of pop texture. So this all starts in the recording process. The vocals were recorded through a Neumann U47 FET clone into a Neve 1073 clone. And when we were recording, we did filter out using the high-pass filter on the Neve at 80 hertz. So we've already filtered everything below 80 hertz, which we don't need in a vocal. Her vocals start around 150 to 200 hertz. To 200 hertz are the lowest fundamental tones of her voice. So everything beneath 80 is all just going to be room noise and breath and all that kind of stuff. And then we did add a little bit of a 12K boost on the EQ, about 1 dB, just to add a little bit of extra sheen and air and breathiness to it. So, and again, when we're thinking about mixing, our mixing process really starts when we're recording, right? Because we, as long as we're getting a really great signal into the DAW or into our recording medium, as long as we're starting with that, we're going to have to do less work later on. So that's why I add that little bit of 12K boost and we filter out everything below 80 because it just gives us a better starting signal. A lot of guys will also compress on the way in, hook up a compressor in your recording chain for your vocal. I will sometimes do that, but it's really easy to overbake your signal, right? It's easy to apply too much compression on the way in and then you can't uncompress it because it's part of the recorded sound. So I'm doing my compressing after the fact. Now, once you've recorded, and this is one of my favorite features in Studio One, instead of doing vocal automation like you would traditionally do, we are able to split up and kind of look at each of these and do separate region gains for each of these little things. So that's kind of how I automate my vocal. And that makes it so that it's hitting the compressor more evenly, and it's hitting your de-esser and all the stuff that we're going to get into in a second. If you're able to adjust the gain like this, it's kind of like writing the gain knob on the preamp as you're recording. It really just gets everything nice and even before it's hitting the compression, so it just helps to level things out that much more. I've found that if I'm trying to automate after the fact, obviously automation is a really critical part of mixing, but you can kind of end up, if you've got compression artifacts because you're compressing heavier or anything like that, or you've got delays, it can start to mess with the volumes of those a little bit, and the delay can stand out more in certain parts of the track because you're automating the fader higher. I like to instead approach it kind of from the back end where I even out all of my regions, and you can see how many edits I've done and how much different, kind of volume difference there is in some of these sections. I've evened all of that out to begin with, and then we're hitting our compressors and stuff. It's kind of how I prefer to work. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the track. We'll listen up through the first chorus or so, and just kind of get a feel for how it's sounding right now. And this is fully mixed. Then we're going to go back through and kind of talk about what I did.
I go to shows all alone, maybe dumb 'cause I know.
Such a great singer.
I'm living life for myself, but it all doesn't help. When I see them touch like we did, I wish I couldn't see. When I see them kiss like we did, I wonder what it'll be. I hope nothing gets in the way. Will they one day look at couples and say, when I see them touch like we did, I could die.
So there you go. First verse, first chorus. You know, again, she's a wonderful singer, and her voice has so much cool texture and timbre to it. So we don't want to ruin that. We don't want to do anything too crazy. We just want to get it sounding good with a little bit of EQ, and compression, that kind of stuff. And then we want to do just a little bit of reverb to give it some ambiance and a little bit of delay. So if I take off all of our effects and we just listen to our raw signal.
I go to shows all alone, maybe dumb 'cause I know.
You know, we've edited out the breaths and the silences in between.
Living life for myself, but it all doesn't help.
Okay. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it with a de-esser. Okay, now a de-esser is basically a frequency-dependent compressor. And Vero has a tendency to have very low S's. Different vocalists' voices will be a little bit different when it comes to their S and very sibilant frequencies. Hers are pretty broad spectrum because she's got such a powerful voice and she's got a lot of control over her mouth and her vocal cords and everything. We're setting our de-esser pretty low. We're starting the de-essing at 2K. So it's compressing from 2K up to all the way up to 20K in this sense. And that's also going to help to control if it ever gets too airy or too breathy, which is more in the 10 to 15K range or 8 to 15K range. So we're compressing that a little bit as well, just in case, you know, it might not be an S, it might be a kind of a sound towards the end of a note or something like that. We're going to be catching that as well so that doesn't get too out of control. But because it's a de-esser, we're not compressing anything beneath those frequencies. So we're still letting the meat of the voice resonate really, really naturally. I'm also doing that before we do the rest of our compressing and stuff. You know, again, I'm staging it in such a way that we're starting each phase of the vocal process with as clean of a signal as we can. So we start at the preamp with a little bit of EQ and filtering. Then we even out our region gains. Now we're de-essing to control S's. Now that we've got a de-essed signal and a signal that already has, you know, appropriate EQ and stuff on it, now we can start to look at kind of our plug-in side of things. So for instance, taking a look at, here we've got Soft Tube Console 1, our EQ and our compression. Now, again, I want this vocal, because of the nature of the song and because of the nature of her voice, I want it to sound as natural as possible. I really don't want to do anything too wacky. So you can see I'm doing a little bit of gating. Okay, that's going to help pull out any breaths or noises that were missed in editing.
I go to shows all alone, maybe dumb 'cause I know.
Take our EQ and compression off here.
I'm living life for myself, but it all doesn't help.
Okay, so we've cleaned it up just a little bit more. You can hear that de-esser's kind of grabbing the top end. And I think an edit got scooted here. That's getting cut off just a little bit early. So always make sure your edits are clean as well. I think something in here got bumped a little bit, so we'll fix that. But yeah, so we've now gated a little bit. So we're, that's again just to remove any extraneous noise.
I go to shows all alone.
We are adding another high pass filter just to make 100% sure that we've removed everything. I've got it set to about 110 hertz.
Maybe dumb 'cause I know.
We're making sure that it's getting rid of everything that we don't need. Okay.
But it sure doesn't help.
Now, when we bring our EQ back in, you'll see I'm adding just a little hump at around 900. Now, that's just really trying to bring out more of the fullness. Because she has a really airy voice naturally, and we've added a little bit of air on the preamp. Now I'm trying to kind of even that out by just boosting the mid-range and because it's a broadband EQ, a little bit of the lower mids of her voice as well.
I'm living life for myself, but it sure doesn't help.
And then lastly, we're just going to add a little bit of compression. This is the standard SSL 4000 channel compressor, 2-to-1 ratio, slower attack because I don't want it to be too grabby. I want all of her inflections and stuff to be nice and present, and the enunciation at the beginning of each word or syllable to be present. Kind of a medium release and a lower threshold so that it does ride the vocal a little bit more. And then only a 2-to-1 ratio to keep it nice and natural.
I go to shows all alone. Maybe dumb 'cause I know.
Oh, actually, now I'm seeing why those edits may have been correct, because we have a little bit of click bleed right there. Okay, I got you. We'll add just a little bit of fade to make that.
Oh, maybe dumb 'cause I know.
Cool. So you can hear.
I'm living life for myself, but it sure doesn't help.
That's really nice and natural. It feels like a good natural representation of her voice.
When I see them touch like we did.
If this were like a rap vocal or maybe a more of a rock vocal, I might use a couple different compressors in line. I might be processing it more aggressively. But again, this is a really open, organic, pop tune. I don't want it to sound overly processed. I want it to be a really natural representation of her voice. So that's why I'm not compressing a ton. I've done other videos here on the channel where, one in particular where we were looking at rap vocals, and I was talking a lot about how I always use 2 compressors in line. And that is true in a lot of cases. But for a tune like this, if I were to do that, it might start to sound really unnatural and kind of squashed. So I take a bit of a different approach. I want it to just sound like Veronique.
I go to shows all alone. Maybe dumb 'cause I know.
So that's a really good starting point. That's clean, open, natural, feels great. So now we're just going to add a little bit of reverb. I'm using Softube's SAR1 reverb. This is a really great, it's got a bit of a vintage feel to it, but it's just a good, even verb. We've got a little less than 2-second decay, neutral tone, reflections from a smaller room. We're halfway in between our reverb and early reflections, and our mix is at about what is that here? About 13%.
I'm living life for myself, but it sure doesn't help.
Just a good basic reverb. It's not going to stick out too much in the track. It doesn't sound like she's in some cathedral. It's just adding some body and adding some ambiance. And then lastly, we're just using this real simple delay. This is the stock delay plugin in Studio One, which I actually really like quite a bit. And we're filtering the delay so that it kind of it disappears into the background.
I go to shows all alone. Maybe dumb 'cause I know.
And we've also got it ping-ponging back and forth, left and right, just to add a little bit of extra stereo dimension to the whole thing. We've got it set to a quarter note, and it's ping-ponging back and forth about 60% left to right.
But it shows all alone. Maybe dumb 'cause I know.
Right?
I'm living life for myself, but it sure doesn't help.
And that's not even going to be particularly audible in the track. You'll hear it at the ends of phrases, but it's really just there to give a little bit of extra texture and meat to the vocal and let it stand out a little bit more, okay? So listening to it in the context of the track again.
I go to shows all alone. Maybe dumb 'cause I know. I'm living life for myself, but it sure doesn't help.
That phrase actually sounds a tiny bit quiet, so we'll bring it up.
I'm living life for myself, but it sure doesn't
really, really simple. You know, we're not doing anything crazy. We just want it to sound like her. We want it to sound like her natural voice in a nice room, and then add a little bit of that delay and reverb just for a bit of texture. Okay. So, and this is one, you know, if it were like a real, you know, like a Kesha type or Iggy Azalea or something like that type pop track, we would definitely do a little bit more vocal processing there as well, just like we would with maybe a rap vocal or something like that. But just with the nature of this record and the nature of her as a singer, I don't want to squash any of the vibe out of her voice. I don't want to remove any of the nuance of it. You know what I mean? I really want it to just sound really open and organic and not overly processed. And it gives it a very intimate feel. It gives it a very raw feel and a very kind of emotional feel to have it just be this singer very plainly and cleanly represented through a great mic, great preamp, and minimal processing to get it to where it needs to sit really nicely through the whole track, which it does. And it holds up nicely above the background vocals that we've got going on and some other elements. But that's really it. You know, that gets us to a great starting place. And if you wanted to do different delays or more delays or a more extreme reverb, you could certainly do any of that. And you could take it in that real heavily processed pop direction and do some more compression and stuff like that. But for this track, I didn't find it really necessary. I wanted it to sound as natural as possible. So that is how I go about getting a really good basic female pop vocal. Things you always want to keep in mind: don't over EQ. Use as good of a mic and a preamp as you can. Always use a pop filter when you're recording. We're going to do another video on how to record vocals, so I'll get into a little bit more of that end when we talk about that. But those are really critical steps that relate to mixing as well. Reverb and delay are always a good bet on any kind of pop vocal, but you don't need to overdo them unless you really want the effect there. De-essing is very, very important. You know, just some of these really basic things that we do on most vocals, but you get to see them here in this kind of context. But what do you guys do to your pop vocals? Do you guys have, you know, if you work on pop tracks, what are some of your tips and tricks that you do just to kind of get a good baseline mix going on for your vocal? We would love to hear any tips or tricks you guys have in the comments down below, so definitely join the conversation down there. Again, my name is Alex Scott with Consordini.com. Thank you so much for checking out another one of our videos. We really appreciate you watching, and we will see you in the next one.
I go to shows all alone, maybe dumb 'cause I know